Hello, everyone. This is George Homer with EVERFI. I'm excited to be presenting this important webinar, How to Comply with the NCAA's new sexual assault training policy, alongside my colleagues Rob Bulow and Holly Ryder-Milkovich. The three of us presented this same webinar just 3 weeks ago and had over 1,000 attendees, our largest virtual event ever. In the process, we actually reached the limit of attendance capacity through our GoToWebinar platform. So we decided to do this webinar again to make sure this important information reaches as many campus leaders as possible. If you'd like to ask questions during our webinar, you can do so by clicking the question button on the lower right side of the screen. Holly, Rob, and I will respond to all questions and comments immediately following the webinar. To get started, I'd like to introduce my colleagues and co-presenters. Rob Bulow is Vice President of Prevention Education at EVERFI and is an award-winning prevention educator and public health professional. Great to have you on this webinar, Rob. Holly Ryder-Milkovich is Senior Director of Prevention Education at EVERFI and has over 2 decades of experience in sexual assault prevention. Holly also has been a member of the advisory committee of the NCAA Toolkit development. And again, I'm George Homer, a vice president here at EVERFI. I've been helping campuses deploy compliance and prevention programs for over a decade. With that, I'll turn things over to Rob to get us started.
And so many of you joining this webinar today might be new to our organization, but EVERFI has been around for over 15 years, now working with 1,700 campuses across the country, reaching more than 10 million students, staff, and faculty each year through online prevention and compliance trainings. But beyond the scope of our work in higher education, we've also been involved in supporting national initiatives, including the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault, and It's on Us, which we know that NCAA is a proud partner of as well. And we've also got partnerships with the major professional sports leagues to address topics like healthy relationships, summer learning loss, and STEM. Over the years, we've had the opportunity to work really closely with many great folks from campus athletic departments. While this new NCAA policy has certainly generated a bit of urgency, it's not surprising to see so many people from athletics joining us today. From our conversations, it's clear that there's tremendous commitment among coaches, trainers, and athletic directors to doing good work to keep athletes safe and healthy. A lot of the issues we're talking about today aren't necessarily new or unique, but we know that athletes are, and training for them should reflect that. That said, our data actually show that athletes have pretty similar attitudes and perspectives regarding sexual assault compared to non-athletes. In fact, in certain areas, athletes actually have healthier, more positive responses than other students. This is really encouraging, especially given the important role that student athletes play as leaders and social influencers on campus. So these perspectives are really important in the context of this new NCAA sexual violence policy, and certainly the things that we're going to be covering in today's webinar. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, when we asked you what your priorities were for this webinar, it was very clear to us that getting details and really digging in to the NCAA training policy was the #1 priority for most folks joining. That said, with over 1,500 registrants for this webinar, hundreds of attendees also were interested in other topics like building an annual ongoing prevention plan, looking at the elements of an effective comprehensive prevention strategy, tracking and reporting training participation, and evaluating impact. And so certainly we're going to create a webinar experience today that talks about each of these important topic areas. So our agenda today, we're certainly going to kick off addressing that #1 priority and really talking about the sexual violence policy in detail, and then moving on to the NCAA toolkit as a guidepost for us in addressing some of those policy requirements around training. And then we're going to be talking more about training challenges and best practices, and conclude by talking about a path forward together. All right, digging into the policy. Folks that have reviewed the policy are probably now clear that there's really 3 main mandates that require sign-off from an institution's president or chancellor, their Title IX coordinator, and their athletic directors. So this sign-off requires those senior leaders to attest that athletic departments are knowledgeable about and compliant with campus policies and processes, that campus policies and processes, as well as contact information for a school's Title IX coordinator, are readily available within the athletic department, and that all athletes, coaches, and athletic staff have been educated on prevention, intervention, and response each year on these critical training topics. And this policy then includes also a number of overarching principles, particularly focusing on the leadership role of student athletes and athletic staff, and the recommendations provided in the NCAA's Sexual Violence Prevention Toolkit that, as I said, should serve as guidance for complying with those comprehensive training requirements. For folks familiar with higher ed law, training mandates on sexual violence are not new from a regulatory perspective, but it's interesting to look at the NCAA policy in the context of other pieces of related legislation around training. So looking specifically at the Clery Act here, the Clery Act requires a good faith effort to reach and train students, staff, and faculty each year around sexual assault prevention and response. And the NCAA policy goes a step further, requiring a level of annual verification that's unprecedented by having that president's Title IX coordinator and athletic director sign off. And the decision by the NCAA to have these three stakeholders attest that that training has been provided to all athletic students and staff is really a recognition that some schools don't have the highly coordinated efforts in place that are necessary for maximizing impact. And from a timing perspective, so the policy was announced on August 17th and went into effect immediately. The NCAA has indicated that they'll be making the sign-off form available electronically in March with a May 15th sign-off deadline. So based on this timeline, realistically, there's less than 10 months for schools to submit that attestation form that training has been provided to all student athletes and athletic staff. And once that's submitted, a list of schools that have verified compliance with that policy will be presented to the Board of Governors and will be published on ncaa.org. So this sign-off page, or the attestation page, isn't just intended to be a listing of compliant schools, though, but really a place for campuses to articulate the specifics around their prevention training and really to showcase their work. And at this point, actually turn it over to my colleague, Holly Ryder-Milkovich, who's going to talk a little bit more about the NCAA toolkit. And I will share that in addition to her involvement, as Michele mentioned, as an advisory council member of this toolkit, Holly's got tremendous experience working with student athletes and athletic departments from her prior work at the University of Michigan, and she also represented four-year colleges and universities in the negotiated rulemaking for the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, which really brought about the sexual assault training mandates that now govern all higher ed institutions through Clery. So with that, I want to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Holly Ryder-Milkovich.
Thank you so much, Rob. I am so excited to be talking about this issue. Certainly, as a member of the University of Michigan Injury Center team that supported the development of the NC2A toolkit, I strongly endorse the work of the toolkit, and I think that it reflects not only best practices in the prevention field, but a deep understanding of some of the specific realities of student athlete lives and of the unique relationships that athletic staff, coaches, and trainers have with those student athletes. You know, this NC2A toolkit and the guidance that it reflects, as well as some of the work that we're going to talk about today, has embedded within it that understanding that your relationships with students don't start the minute that those students step foot on your campus, but that start oftentimes, you know, while they're in high school in the recruiting process, that parents that you've sat in their living rooms and really have been on a journey with these student athletes for a long time, and that's such important integral information to be embedded within the work that you're doing on campus. So let's dive into that toolkit then. I want a couple of notes here that I want to note. So this is a partnership between the Sports Science Institute and the NC2A Office for Inclusion. I noted that the University of Michigan Injury Center was one of many higher ed and public health and violence prevention organizations that were gathered around the table to develop this program, and it's got a significant list of endorsements. I'll say, though, that as we're going into this toolkit, and I really strongly encourage you to take a look at the toolkit, read it, spend some time with it, share it with your staff. It's worth the additional time and investment. But if you're looking for this toolkit to be a play-by-play analysis of exactly what you should do on campus, you're likely to be disappointed. But move from that disappointment to identify some of the real strengths of the approach that the NC2A toolkit offers us. So there are 5 core commitments in this NC2A toolkit, and we're going to start at the bottom. So I noted that the NC2A's toolkit does not have a prescribed set of efforts that institutions should go through, but they do lay out principles and foundations, and they have a number of really helpful checklists that go through each of these areas. And so starting at the bottom here, one of the things I think is really strong about this toolkit is that it starts with the expectation that in order for there to be a ongoing significant effort, that there needs to be strong leadership commitment to sexual violence prevention work. And that strong leadership commitment takes a variety of different forms that we're going to go into deeper later in the webinar. Certainly at the top is, that visible commitment from athletic directors, college presidents, Title IX coordinators to ending sexual assault for all students on campus and to making prevention a priority. The next 2 pieces, this collaboration, compliance, and accountability, these 2 pieces often go together. So when we're looking at collaboration for the NC2A in these 5 core commitment areas, we're looking at that sort of meaningful progress in sexual violence prevention, ensuring that programs that are developed are informed by research and evidence, that they are created in collaboration and integrated between those individuals on and off campus who have prevention expertise. So happy to hear so many of you are already engaging with those prevention experts. And also collaboration to ensure that there is compliance and that there is accountability, not only with those important NC2A rules, but also the federal laws, federal guidance, and state laws that govern this area. And last but not least, when we're looking at these 5 core commitments, where we would place it at the top in something that perhaps some audience members may think of as being the starting and ending place is that education and engagement. So this is looking at the kinds of programming that is happening to help increase knowledge, skills, and shift behaviors and beliefs around sexual violence prevention, not only in our student athlete community, but also in our coaches, in our trainers, in our athletic administrators, all of those individuals who really help reinforce cultural expectations with the end result, and this is, I think, is something that the NC2A toolkit takes a leadership role on, to say that we're looking for culture change within athletic departments, and as athletic departments are themselves embedded within in a microcosm of larger institutions, culture change within our institutions of higher education. It's the lofty goal that is so worth striving for, and that we think absolutely is able to be achieved. Not coincidentally, we have, I've noted here, a framework for comprehensive prevention that we follow at EVERFI. So our campus prevention network has looked over the past decade at the best prevention work happening in the research literature, both for sexual violence and for other kinds of organizational and societal harms, and from that research literature distilled into a diagnostic inventory tool, a framework for identifying the best practices for comprehensive prevention. So our sexual assault diagnostic inventory, as I noted, is a comprehensive research-based assessment that allows campuses to look at their prevention programs and practices across each of the pillars that we note here. So when we're looking at these pieces, we're looking at the strengths that campuses can bring to their comprehensive prevention work. And it aligns solidly with the core commitments of the NC2A. No surprise, because our framework for comprehensive prevention in the Campus Prevention Network is also aligned with best practices, as are the core commitments of the NC2A toolkit. So they're entirely aligned with each other. As we're going through these pieces, I want to note when we're looking at institutionalization, we're looking at that degree of system buy-in. So like the NC2A toolkit, how often are senior leaders talking about this issue? How are the ways in which this issue is being supported through the allocation of appropriate staff to the role, other kinds of resources that are invested in this issue, the ways in which stakeholders are informed of this work and that is shared broadly. We're looking at those critical processes, so the strategic and collaborative ways in which that institutionalization makes its way into the ways in which efforts are evaluated, the ways in which those evaluations are integrated into ongoing improvements to sexual violence prevention works, whether or not there's a strategic plan, how policies that are the visible values and expectations of institutions enacted, and how are they shared more broadly with others. And last but not least, again for us, the tip of the triangle or the spear, we're looking at that programming. So the intentional development of programming that is designed to reach different kinds of learners, so that multimodal design of prevention programming, and messaging that's delivered by a wide variety of messengers so that it resonates broadly with a wide number of different kinds of audiences. So all of those pieces put together create this comprehensive framework. Institutions who are interested in seeing their own work benchmarked against these national best practices can go to the Campus Prevention Network. You can see it on the page here. This is an opportunity that's available to any institution of higher education across the country. You can take a pledge to commit to the best prevention work possible, have access to our sexual assault diagnostic inventory, where you'll have an opportunity to evaluate the strength of your prevention efforts, compare them to those research-based best practices, and also benchmark against those leading institutions. So as we share data with you during this webinar, we'll be highlighting some of the practices of those institutions who have been designated as advanced institutions as determined by our sexual assault diagnostic inventory and benched against the best practices that the research literature identifies. Okay, so let's dive right into a little bit more about what these core commitments in the toolkit mean. So again, from the get-go, you see the congruence between the toolkit's recommendations and those of our Campus Prevention Network for best practice in sexual violence. And it starts with this base of tangible institutional commitment. And that's this commitment in staffing, the commitment in other resources, and in that positive voice from institutional leaders. So you can see here that as we look at our own research on best practices from institutions across the country, we have, for those leading institutions who are doing the best work possible in sexual violence prevention, they're spending over $10 per student in budget funding for prevention alone. And that is aside from the kinds of resources that are integrated into staffing efforts. But it's really important, and the toolkit makes clear that there really needs to be dedicated staffing to violence prevention in order for this work to get the appropriate attention that it requires, and also for those individuals who are doing this work to develop the content expertise that's going to ensure that your programs are aligned and are as effective as possible. It also supports evaluation efforts going forward. But that senior leadership commitment is so key here. And I think that this call out from the toolkit for those senior leaders' voices, that athletic director's voices, those college presidents' voices, provides us with an opportunity to think about ways to leverage that powerfully influential voice of the athletic department on campus. But not only on campus, but also with those alumni and fans of your institution's athletic programs. You know, consider all those venue options, direct messaging to student athletes and coaches as a part of perhaps in-person training, messages embedded in online courses or Twitter channel callouts, website messages, billboarding messages. I can think of so many different ways in which powerful voices from the athletic department can be leveraged to shape the work not only happening within the athletic department and on campus, but to help shape that messaging and those priorities in the greater community that cares about the athletic department on your campus. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit more here about collaboration. So one of the things that I think is really important here is that because this is complex and ongoing work, the NC2A toolkit notes that it's really important that there be a designated coordinator to ensure that this work is going forward in a meaningful way, and that that designated coordinator be a part of a collaboration team that includes those additional subject matter experts on campus. That includes the Title IX coordinators and individuals who have expertise in compliance. That includes certainly partners in student life. There are some really helpful tools in the toolkit that provide sort of a map and a guidepost for folks in the athletic departments who may not have had as much experience in interacting closely with student life to understand who all those players are. And helpfully, there's also a roadmap for student life members who may not have had as much opportunity to engage with athletic departments to really understand some of the ecosystem of athletic departments, so that this collaboration team can come together in a way that is mutually beneficial and meaningful. One of the things that we note is that only about half of schools who include athletics in their sexual assault prevention task forces, when we ask campuses, who is a part of the work that you're doing in sexual violence prevention on campus? This is something that we hope that every campus will seek to change going forward if they're not already including athletics on those prevention task force, and that athletic departments will take as a priority for their work. Certainly, athletic staff have specific expertise and specific knowledge about their athletes' lives that is so important to have represented as voices on those committees to make sure that the work of the athletic department and the needs of student athletes are being integrated. And at the same time, engaging, again, those experts in the development of those courses so that it reflects both the strengths of an athletic department and also the strengths of best practices when it comes to prevention, and that it allows for the athletic department's work to be integrated into a strategic plan that makes sense across the entire campus, so that the work that's happening with all students is being amplified and reinforced with the work that's happening in the athletic department. We want then for this work to be shared broadly as well. That's another really important piece of collaboration, is breaking down those silos. As we've looked at the work of advanced institutions who are demonstrating the best work in prevention, we note that every single one of those advanced institutions are sharing progress indicators with key stakeholders. They know how they're moving forward with this work. They're able to demonstrate that by effective data, and they're sharing that data so that it can be used by others in meaningful ways, which is such an important part of collaboration. Moving then to compliance and accountability, I love that the NC2A strongly promotes that policies be widely communicated. It's no surprise that strong, well-written policies are useless if they're not shared widely with those who are impacted by them or have a responsibility to reinforce them. So in our campus prevention network, pillars of prevention, we look for those policies to be widely disseminated, and the same is true for the NC2A toolkit. Certainly, individuals need to have information about the roles that they play and the responsibilities that they play, especially if they have responsibilities related to reporting. But it's also really important for student athletes to understand what their rights are and the roles that they are intended to play on campus. We know that that the legislative field is shifting, that federal guidance as well as federal and state law can be changing, and that as busy athletic administrators, this is not something that necessarily you always have your thumb on. So making sure that you have those strong collaborative relationships with others on campus who can be ensuring that the work that's happening in your athletic department is infused by the most recent understanding of the legislation and guidance that's coming out. I want to pause here to note that as we've looked at the work of as we've looked at our research from EVERFI's courses for faculty and staff, one of the things that we've noted that only half of campus administrators report that they know how to appropriately respond to disclosures. And certainly every campus administrator has the potentiality of being placed in a situation where a student shares information about harm they experienced. And we want for every single campus administrator who may have that situation occur, understand how to respond compassionately and effectively to that student and guide them to appropriate resources for care and support and reporting if they decide to do so. One positive note is that while perhaps fewer campus administrators know how to respond to disclosures than we would like to see, over 65% of athletes say that they know how to report a sexual assault at their school, and this is higher than in the general student population. So clearly, student athletes are receiving information about how to report information. We also want to make sure that they understand what those rights are and what their responsibilities are as well. And last but not least, that contact information for the Title IX coordinator, so that the individual on your campus who has ultimate responsibility for ensuring that these matters are addressed effectively, that there are appropriate accommodations put in place for students who have experienced harm, that all of the expectations of the institution are met, rest with the Title IX coordinator, and we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to fulfill that role. When we're looking at engagement, this is a good place to note that at EVERFI, we do all of our work with students from a positive strength-based prevention approach. And so we're really excited to see the same emphasis in the toolkit from the NCAA. So certainly, we know that student athletes are coming to campus already with many natural leadership qualities, and you know this best as individuals who work closely with those athletes. One of the things that we want to make sure is that those athletes have that leadership training so that they are able to engage in the work that they're already doing. These students, as the data point on the lower right notes, feel a significant responsibility already to help create a safe and supportive environment on their campus. And this is, in fact, much higher than the general population who agree with this statement at about 50%. One of the things that I think is so important for us to emphasize is that these students need leadership training to support the commitment that they have already engaged in. And likewise, as you see on the left-hand side, our research at EVERFI notes that faculty and staff, 80% of them see themselves playing an active role in campus sexual assault. And so for us, really, the question is not whether student athletes and athletic staff will work to end sexual assault on campus. They've already committed to doing so. The question, I think, instead is rather whether we will provide them with the tools that they need to be effective in the roles that they've already chosen to play. It's so important also that students have an opportunity to engage in campus efforts more broadly so that they can demonstrate that leadership that they have on their teams within the larger student body, and so that they get reinforcement from the general population of students who also, and their peers who see this as really important. And last but not least, we're looking at education. The components that we want to make sure are a part of an educational effort that are reflected in the toolkit are that education is not a one and done, that it's being delivered multiple times and in ways that are developmentally appropriate for students. And so a few of the places that the toolkit notes are at orientation, before big game days, over the course of time in team meetings, messaging happening from coaches, that it be informed by evidence, and that it be comprehensive. So providing the same training over and over again is unlikely to actually be effective or meet the needs of students, and it's certainly not what the toolkit asks of campuses. It has to address alcohol and other drugs. We know that these are issues that are deeply embedded in sexual violence that are happening on our campuses, and these two pieces need to be addressed together in thoughtful ways that reinforce positive norms and positive behaviors on campus, and evaluated for impact, both the process, how it's delivered, and also the outcomes. What are students learning, and how are their behaviors being positively impacted by the work that you're doing? Again, the emphasis is on multi-year and comprehensive in the toolkit. The one and done approach is going to fall short of the expectations laid out by NCAA. And I'll also note that this is work that needs to be happening not only with students, but also with staff members and also non-employee staff members. The language that the NCAA toolkit uses is those individuals who have a role in influencing student athletes' decision-making and behaviors should receive training and support. So you can see these topic areas on the left-hand side, but also on the right-hand side when we're looking at negotiating consent, active listening, managing referral process, bystander intervention. These are pieces that require skill building as well. So courses need to be, and education programs need to be interactive. They need to give students an opportunity to practice. And faculty or staff as well, and trainers and coaches need to have an opportunity to practice these issues. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to my colleague Rob to talk about some of these training challenges and best practices.
Thanks so much, Holly. And I must say, you've got a way of making prevention sound really easy and intuitive. But we absolutely recognize the complexity of addressing these issues. So I'm sure you've probably, folks on the line, have come up with a number of questions and considerations around training. And we've also identified some areas that are likely to present challenges. So going through some of these challenge areas, one, so as Holly mentioned before, the NCAA policy doesn't prescribe a specific course of action, but they offer the toolkit as guidance. And that goes into tremendous detail on best practice recommendations that can serve, as I said, a guidepost for informing your training efforts. Absolutely, we know that tailored and targeted education is a known best practice. So having athletic-specific content so students can see themselves in that learning experience, and that coaches and faculty, coaches and athletic administrators and trainers are able to have an educational experience that's relevant to their own context working with student athletes is really critically important. Scope and flexibility of deployment. I've worked on a college campus for a number of years, and I know that reaching students at scale is a real challenge. And that challenge of both scope and scale, as well as flexibility, becomes even more challenging when you think about the context of athletics. So thinking about whether certain teams are in season versus off season, or varied team schedules, or the fact that athletes are overscheduled, and certainly considering the new legislation on time demands facing athletes and balancing mandatory versus voluntary initiatives, we recognize that that's a real challenge, and it's important to have flexibility in the implementation of your training programs. And absolutely, this policy is going to shed light on how tough it can be to simply monitor who has received training, yet alone, beyond tracking participation, the ability to assess impact and identify ongoing priority areas. That's absolutely paramount for demonstrating that what you're doing is moving the needle, and if it's not, or even if it is, to have a sense of what your next steps need to be to continue to reinforce and engage students and staff in learning. And then lastly, establishing a training and tracking plan that senior leaders are comfortable and confident putting their name on in an aggressive timeline is really no small task either. So we recognize those really substantial training challenges and are excited to talk about some best practices to address them. And diving in specifically to one of those challenges, one of the things that we learned from you all in registering for the webinar and responding to some of those registration questions specific to tracking ongoing training is certainly it's great to see that close to half of schools are providing annual ongoing training to their student athletes and consistently tracking student athlete participation. But that means that 56% of schools are either currently not offering training for student athletes, or they're offering training, but it's not being consistently tracked. So I see that as a tremendous opportunity, and now, of course, a need for more training and more consistency in how we're monitoring the delivery and the participation in that training. So if I could really try to boil down all of the great information that Holly shared into a set of conceptual buckets, it would be this. It's thinking about planning, implementation, and reporting. And so planning is really looking into building collaborative relationships with the experts on campus and in your broader community. Looking at the unique needs and strengths of your student athletes and athletic staff, and looking to develop a prevention strategy that's going to align both with the uniqueness of your students and employees, as well as the best practices for doing meaningful work around prevention. And then putting that into place through a training plan that looks at, for students, the 4-year life course that they're going to be on campus, sometimes 5 years or more for some students, and thinking about the development of your employees and making sure that you continue to expand upon knowledge and skills. Deploying the training at scale and certainly having that built-in tracking mechanism are important considerations around the implementation of a good prevention program. And then lastly, thinking about reporting. So making sure that you have strong evaluation measures in place, that you're digging into both the participation data as well as the survey data to learn about where you can continue to focus your efforts going forward, and then finding a mechanism for sharing out that information, not just to the 3 stakeholders that need to sign off on compliance for the NCAA policy, but also the other campus and community stakeholders who can be helping to support your work and leveraging the leadership of student athletes and helping to make change more broadly across campus as well. When Holly talked about the educational requirements laid out in the NCAA toolkit, there's a number of content areas that are critical for comprehensive education, but there are also some additional topics that we think are noteworthy and particularly important when you're thinking about athletic staff. So I'll dive into a couple of them here. So bystander intervention. Being able to step in when you, as an athletic staff member, see problematic situations, whether it's among student athletes or among colleagues, not only helps to keep those other athletes or colleagues safe, but it also demonstrates leadership and influences team culture. And then thinking about supporting students who have experienced harm, one of the things that you might see is the more you demonstrate commitment around these issues through good training, the more likely it is that you're going to have students coming forward and disclosing their own experiences. And so being prepared for that and being able to respond in a way that is supportive and gets them connected to resources is really critical. And then if an incident does happen, that particularly if it involves an athlete, being able to effectively manage communication, whether it's internally to the team or externally to media, is one of the most difficult and important challenges a coach or athletic director can face. And so it's really important that training really hones in on some of those key content areas. And sort of less in the weeds on content areas, but more conceptually from a process perspective, here's a sample student training plan that we put together to sort of highlight what this can look like at your institution. So athletic departments should provide at least one centralized training each year. So this is programming designed to reach all of your student athletes that's tracked and evaluated to demonstrate compliance. Having one centralized training each year at least is really, really critical and is going to help build some efficiency into some of those reporting mechanisms that are critical from a compliance perspective. So some examples of that centralized training, it could be an orientation program prior to the start of the academic year or the athletic season. It could be an online training program that all of your student athletes have to participate in. It could be peer education workshops or other trainings from institutional or community professionals. These programs should be structured as an age-appropriate curriculum, as Holly talked about. You have to think about the needs of students at all of the different stages of their development. But this doesn't mean that all of those pieces have to be in place right out of the gates. So you could think about year one, this year, the policies in effect. What can we get all of our students, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors to participate in this year that sets a foundation of knowledge, awareness, and skills? And then how can we maybe use that training next year for our incoming first-year students, and then develop a level 2 training that builds upon those skills? And then in year 3, building an additional program for just your juniors and seniors. And over the course of 4 years, you found yourself with a really comprehensive, developmentally appropriate, centralized training plan. And then doing that in addition to prevention initiatives in the broader campus environment, there should absolutely be that additional support. And so examples would be coach messaging at key times, athletic participation, other campus campaigns, specific activities for student athletes that promote their leadership. So lots of opportunities for additional initiatives. We know that change requires that, but it is really important to be thinking about centralized training too. So one exemplary case study that we wanted to share is actually from the University of Michigan, and there's really no better person than Holly to dig into that.
Thank you, Rob. I have to note that one of the things that really pulled me from what I thought had been the best job in the world at the University of Michigan was the opportunity here at EVERFI to take the extraordinary work that I saw and had a part of at Michigan and be able to share that information and weave those practices into the work happening at 1,700 other schools and colleges across the country. So it's a lovely opportunity to return to some of the work happening. And I'm only going to be touching on a few key components of Michigan's program. It's a rich and layered ongoing effort, and it deserves a longer explication than this webinar will provide space for. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do that in the future. I also want to note that this is the 5th year that University of Michigan is doing this work in its current iteration. And so as campuses are looking at the University of Michigan as a case study, remember also that this is work that has been going on for some time. And it's been driven from the beginning by the vision, commitment, and expertise of Dean of Students Laura Blake-Jones and Bitsy Ritt, who is the Senior Associate Athletic Director and Senior Woman Administrator at Michigan. Their work was championed early on by the AD, Dave Brandon, at the time, and continues under the strong, visible, and vocal leadership of Ward Manuel, who's the current AD. So when this effort was first initiated in 2013, student life subject matter experts, including me, in sexual assault prevention and alcohol and other drug harm prevention, conflict resolution, and others, collaborated with those experts in the athletic department to craft a training curriculum for both athletes and for athletic staff that built on the common core of EVERFI's online sexual assault program, as well as the other in-person trainings that all students on campus receive in their first year. A couple of important points to note about this work that was initiated again 5 years ago and continues to be built on today, that prior to its launch, then AD Brandon required his entire leadership team to receive significant training to prepare those folks to support their coaches, staff, and student athletes in those sexual violence prevention efforts. Then, all coaches received required extensive training in the dynamics of sexual assault and its root causes, in bystander intervention so that they could intervene not only with athletes but also with peers and other coaches, in how to support impacted athletes, be they respondents, complainants, or the teen community, what their reporting responsibilities are, how they can connect student athletes to resources on campus beyond the athletic campus, and their responsibility, and this is so key, the coach and trainer responsibility for setting the culture and tone of respect with their athletes on their teams. And it is a testament to the University of Michigan that this early commitment has continued, and that every coach and trainer, without exception, continues to receive this training. A couple of other pieces. The athletic department also put real teeth into their expectation that all coaches and all athletes and trainers receive training on a yearly basis, and that student athletes complete that online training and other required trainings that all students receive. That curriculum has expanded and evolved over time to develop specific trainings for different class years, and it's integrated student athletes and sexual assault peer educators into the training in robust and meaningful ways that are guided by professional staff. And I'll note, head coaches are present at each training, along with their athletic administrators who reinforce their commitment to the training and the expectation of all athletes. These are some of the pieces that make the work happening at the University of Commitment, those statements of commitment, that mandate education, that the training is timed, that the curriculum is scaffolded, and that it was created in collaboration. That makes this, I think, an exceptional case study of the toolkit already in action. And with that, I'll hand the reins over to my colleague, George Homer, who's the Vice President at EVERFI. George has been working for over a decade with D1, D2, and D3 schools across the country, helping them solve those complex training, compliance, and prevention challenges. He really understands the universe of higher ed and the pressure that schools are under to get this work right. So I'm delighted to hand the reins over to you, George.
Thank you so much, Holly and Rob, for guiding us through this new policy. Over the past 3 weeks, I've had countless conversations with athletics staff, Title IX coordinators, and student affairs who are sprinting to expand their existing sexual violence education strategies to meet the heightened standards that Rob and Holly just outlined for us. We know these education or training programs need to be completed in this academic year, which has increased the urgency and anxiety to get something new in place now. From my conversations with athletics and Title IX specifically, we know that most of you are already doing something to educate your student athlete population on sexual violence, but very few of you are doing what's required under this new policy. That includes EVERFI customers, as we're being pushed to expand our catalog and technology to meet these changes. To that end, as the largest provider of sexual violence prevention education in the country, EVERFI just announced that we're launching a new program to help NCAA institutions meet this new mandate. As you might imagine, there's been a lot of momentum around this product launch given the new NCAA mandate. What we're launching is a new student athlete and athletic staff annual ongoing training program to address the NCAA policy on sexual assault education. A big thanks to Rob, Holly, and the 550 EVERFI employees who have come together so quickly to make this possible. A few more details on what we're launching. The EVERFI Athletics program will include annual ongoing student athlete specific content, athletic staff training, and platform functionality to help campuses deploy, track, and report program participation for your NCAA attestation sign-off. We also have annual NCAA impact reports that summarize your annual efforts and can be sent along with your attestation ahead of the sign-off deadline for this academic year. For campuses interested in launching this new athletics program with EVERFI, I'll give you more information on how to do that in just a minute. But first, I'd like to offer some additional perspective on the challenges this new policy presents. I'll move through this quickly, but I think it's important to revisit the challenges that Rob just outlined and give you a sense of how EVERFI can help your campus address these challenges with our new courses and platform. First, launching an annual program that aligns to the NCAA toolkit is certainly critical. To mirror the educational challenges that Rob outlined, this slide will look familiar to you. The courses and technology available from EVERFI will address all 5 elements discussed here. We've heard from campuses that are trying to retool existing programs to meet this expanded scope, and we know it's hard. We know how hard it is to build a program that's dynamic, engaging, while also athletic specific, and informed by evidence and evaluated for impact. Having assessments built in and around your educational programs to measure outcomes and impact for inclusion in your annual attestation is also a major challenge. We have a team of over 100 dedicated just to this project and timeline. This is hard work. Let me review these 5 elements on the slide here quickly and how our solution can help address them. We have a dedicated cloud-based platform to manage and track course participation by student athlete and athletic staff available in real time, 24/7. Our research-based educational course content that's evidence-informed and built by the EVERFI team, including Rob and Holly, that powers the Title IX and Clery training programs for over 1,000 campuses across the country. As I indicated, our new courses launching in October are designed for annual student, athlete, and staff deployment to address the ongoing NCAA training requirement. This is ongoing training that changes every year to prevent training fatigue. These courses are designed to address alcohol and other drugs and the intersectionality with sexual assault. And lastly, our courses and platform represent an integrated solution that provides pre- and post-course assessments and surveys to measure impact and effectiveness, all of which can be tracked and measured in real time. As Rob also mentioned, one of the major challenges is addressing the breadth of topics covered in the toolkit. Under Holly's leadership, these are core subjects that are already core to EVERFI training programs and will be included in the new student athlete and athletic staff courses launching in October. The challenges on alignment with the toolkit are vast. It certainly helps that we have Holly Ryder-Milkovich, who is involved in the committee to develop this toolkit, making sure that our courses hit every point here, including hazing, bullying, alcohol, drugs, negotiating consent, active listening, respectful communication, and managing referral process. What I'm hearing from most campuses now is that it's just too much to do internally on a short timeline and without dedicated budget. We know that most of you have a sexual assault prevention training program in place for your undergrads, which is great. But we also know that a very few of you have centralized student athlete and athletic staff specific training programs that have the same level of quality as your general undergrad program, including that it be informed by evidence and evaluated for impact. I met with Rob, Holly, and the product team last week and got to see some of the student athlete specific scenarios they're building for NCAA institutions. It's remarkable the work they're doing. As we heard today, providing athletic specific content is critical for both residents and NCAA policy compliance. But in addition to these athletic specific course content, our new courses also allow for your own self-customization, including the incorporation of video interviews with campus leaders and coaches, welcome messages, campus images and logos, which allows for you not only an athletic specific experience, but one tailored to your unique campus identity. And somewhere in all of this, our time and that of our student athletes also must be a consideration. Having an efficient and scalable training solution is critical, especially when we think of the NCAA rules around overscheduling and time demands for student athletes. Providing a sexual assault program that's on demand and can be deployed and completed in a short period of time allows for an easier lift for already time-constrained athletic departments. Some of the efficiencies built into our solutions include email reminders, e-signature capabilities for key policies built right into the courses, automation and integration with existing cloud technology you may already have on campus, 24/7 training record access, and single sign-on authentication for a more centralized integration. Challenge 4, and we're almost there, reporting is critical to ensure completion for NCAA attestation purposes. As the saying goes, what gets measured gets done, and having 100% completion is the goal. We know having insight into this information is important for coaches, athletic directors, among others, to know where they stand as they track toward 100% participation. Being able to identify noncompliance down to the individual student athlete can empower coaches and others to make additional direct outreach to increase participation. A major blind spot for campuses that already have a robust student athlete program in place is tracking. What I hear is we're doing a lot, but tracking very little. And with the NCAA attestation requirement for presidents, it creates a tricky situation to ask for that level of sign-off without proof of participation. None of this is to take away from or replace the tremendous work you're already doing on campus, but to educate on sexual violence. But EVERFI offers a peace of mind that's hard to match from a compliance perspective. As Rob and Holly discussed today, from a prevention and best practice perspective, evaluating and reporting impact should be a critical component to your training initiative. But we also know from our conversations with members of the commission who drafted the NCAA policy that it's possible, if not likely, that the attestation page would provide more content than simply the college or university name, and that the page may also provide an opportunity for campuses to detail their sexual violence prevention efforts for parents, prospective student recruits, to have that information available as part of their evaluation process. EVERFI, as the largest provider of sexual violence and substance abuse prevention education in higher education, we're here to support you in meeting this heightened standard. Assessments and surveys are built into our courses, and measuring impact is part of the DNA of our products. Through this platform, presidents, athletic directors, and Title IX will have access to not only completion data, but also benchmarking, assessments, knowledge gains, and course impact for student athletes and athletic staff. As I mentioned, annual NCAA impact reports will also be available at the end of each academic year. These are PDF documents that summarize your training participation and impact for the year to be included with your attestation. As Rob indicated, the NCAA policy serves to elevate the annual ongoing training requirement under Clery and gives it further teeth by requiring annual attestation by your presidents, Title IX coordinators, and athletic directors. As I mentioned, most of the campuses I'm speaking to have great primary prevention programs in place for incoming freshmen, and they are tracking its participation to ensure compliance. Many of you on this webinar are using EVERFI for these primary prevention programs. But from an ongoing perspective, most campuses don't have a centralized and fully trackable annual program in place. And while we know from the FAQ document published by the NCAA that the attestation form will be available in March of 2018, as I indicated just a moment ago, this heightened scrutiny is not just surrounding participation in a training program, but potentially the substance of the programs themselves. And EVERFI can support you here through annual impact reports to include with your annual attestation. Last but not least, Challenge 7, meeting the compliance timeline. Up until 3 weeks ago, we were unaware of this timeline. When we saw the launch of the Campus Save Act in 2013, it gave campuses a significantly longer window to comply. In this case, the NCAA has given you a very short window of time to develop an annual program that meets the high standards outlined by Rob and Holly today. We're targeting late fall and early spring as sort of a line in the sand in terms of when programs will need to have launched in order to meet the 2017-2018 academic year mandate. And to restate the language specifically outlined in the FAQ, this education should be completed during the 2017 academic year. Given that our updated athletics courses will be available through our platform in October, and assuming December is not an optimal implementation month to deploy training, given finals and other end-of-year obligations, this is a very, very short window of time to meet this ongoing training deadline. With that in mind, we're targeting 2 implementation cycles, one for this fall in October and November, and the other for the start of the year for the spring semester for January and February. I promise, folks, we're close to the finish line on this, but I have to get a bit more tactical with you given this very short NCAA timeline. We have a very talented team of customer success managers who support our campuses. As we've mentioned, EVERFI will launch training for 10 million students and employees in 2017. We couldn't do this great work without this team led by Lisa Hobbenstock. That said, this is indeed the busiest time of year for Lisa's team. So while I'm excited to announce the launch of our new athletics package in October, there'll be some limitations on the number of NCAA institutions that can launch with us this year. For those campuses that have a site license already in place with EVERFI, these new athletics courses will be included in your current package and available in October. But if you'd like your own athletics-specific instance for tracking and reporting purposes for attestation, or if you'd like the NCAA impact report, then we'll need to hear from you as these are new offerings that have limited availability. We have 300 NCAA institutions that have already requested to launch our new athletics package this fall and spring, which is great news, but we know there are still campuses that are looking for help. If that's you, please take a moment to raise your hand. We're adding 20 additional spots for the campuses who attended the webinar today. I'm hoping this number increases, as I know 20 won't be enough, but Lisa's team has been implementing programs like these for over a decade, and they take this responsibility seriously. So again, there are 20 additional spots, and folks on this webinar today will have first access to those. If you're interested in launching this new athletics package either this fall or spring, please let me know now by indicating through the question box on your desktop type in fall or spring to secure your spot, and we'll follow up with more information. I'll leave the webinar open for another couple minutes to give you a chance to indicate your interest. Again, just type fall or spring in the question box in the GoToMeeting panel. If you're not sure which time window makes more sense, just type fall and we can walk through what we'll need from your campus in order to launch against a short timeline. On behalf of Rob, Holly, and the EVERFI team, we hope this webinar was useful to you and your campus. A recording of this webinar will be posted on our website tomorrow and shared with each of you via email. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.